Everyone laughed when a single mother inherited an old gas station, calling it junk. But what she found under the floor changed everything. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. Carmen shifted the weight of the laundry basket against her hip as she nudged open the door to their small apartment, the hinges groaning in a familiar protest that blended into the soft giggles of her twin daughters waiting for her inside. The girls, Amara and Lila, were 8 years old, and their laughter was the one bright thread woven through the gray fabric of Carmen's days. The scent of the laundromat clung to her, detergent and hot metal, mixing with the cheap air freshener she had placed by the entryway months ago. The room was cramped, the kitchen table pressed against the couch, and the 2 small bedrooms felt like boxes stacked within boxes. But it was home. It was theirs. She dropped the basket, exhaling as she rubbed her lower back, her body worn from the early morning shift cleaning offices before heading to her second job at the diner, where she served coffee to men who never learned her name. Her shoes, thrift store sneakers, left wet marks on the floor where the rain had seeped through. She noticed Amara coloring at the table, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, while Lila traced shapes in the condensation on the window, daydreaming of the world outside. Carmen felt a twinge of guilt as she watched them. Guilt that they did not have more, that their dreams stretched beyond the walls she could afford. She opened the fridge, scanning the nearly empty shelves before pulling out eggs and the last of the milk to make them dinner. The soft crackle of the pan, the comforting aroma of food, even in its simplicity, filled the small space, and the twins came to the table, pressing their shoulders against hers, chatter spilling like light. They spoke of school, about how they wanted a dog, a room where they didn't have to share a bed, about a yard with grass that wasn't littered with broken glass from the alleyway. Carmen nodded and smiled, but inside her heart folded around itself, heavy with the weight of what she could not give them. The call came that evening, as she was folding their clothes in the living room, the television playing softly with the volume turned low to save on electricity. It was her cousin, Nathan, his voice strained and uncomfortable as he told her the news. Her father had died. A heart attack, sudden but somehow expected, leaving him cold and alone in the house he had refused to leave, the house that smelled of old motor oil and stubborn pride. Carmen stood there, clutching a small pair of Lila's socks, blinking back the heat that gathered behind her eyes. She had not spoken to him in 6 years, not since the day she had packed up her newborn daughters and fled her marriage, arriving at her father's doorstep in tears, only to be met with his disapproving silence and turned back into the rain. Pride, she had told herself then, pride was more important than begging for help, and she had never returned. Now he was gone, and the grief that welled up was sharp and confusing. The twins came to her, sensing the shift in the air, pressing their small bodies against her legs. Carmen knelt, hugging them tightly, the thin fabric of their pajamas warm against her skin, and whispered that everything was all right, even as the world tilted quietly beneath her feet. The funeral was small, a gathering of distant relatives, old friends who wore grief like a borrowed coat, awkward and ill-fitting. Carmen stood in the back, her daughters holding each of her hands, their faces solemn and curious as they watched people murmur prayers and cast flowers into the grave. The air smelled of earth and damp grass, and the sky was a hard, cold blue. She remembered her father's hands, how large they had seemed when she was small, stained with oil, rough from years of fixing engines at the gas station he refused to sell, even when the money was low and the offers came from developers promising shiny buildings in place of the cracked concrete and rusted pumps. Afterward, there was the matter of the will. Carmen found herself in a too bright office, the walls lined with certificates and the smell of coffee that was too bitter, sitting on a chair that made her feel small and out of place. Around her, family gathered, her father's sister, her cousins, people who wore expensive clothes and spoke in clipped tones, their eyes flicking over Carmen's thrift store blouse, her tired face, the twins who sat quietly, drawing on scraps of paper with borrowed pens. They laughed when the lawyer read the part of the will that named Carmen, the laughter low and mean, echoing in the sterile air of the office. Her father had left her the gas station, the crumbling, nearly abandoned station on the edge of town, the one with the pumps that barely worked and the roof that leaked when it rained. The rest, the savings, the house, the truck, all went to her father's sister and the cousins, who nodded, satisfied, already talking about selling the property and dividing the money. Carmen sat there, her daughters pressed against her sides, and felt the laughter burn into her skin like frost. They offered her $5,000 for the gas station right there in the office. Her father's sister smiling with painted lips, telling her it was for the best, that she should take the money and let them handle the sale. $5,000, enough to cover a few months of rent, pay off some bills, maybe buy the girls new shoes that didn't have holes in them. Carmen's hands shook as she looked down at her daughters, who looked back at her with wide, trusting eyes that held dreams she was terrified of breaking. She opened her mouth to agree, to sign the paper they slid toward her. But Amara's small voice broke through the fog of exhaustion that had wrapped around her mind, asking, "Mama, can we see what Grandpa left us?" The words were soft, but they struck Carmen harder than any of the laughter that had filled the room moments before. She closed her mouth, lifting her eyes to meet the gaze of her father's sister, and pushed the paper back across the table. "No," she said, her voice steady even as her heart pounded in her chest. "I'll take what he left me." There was silence then, heavy and uncomfortable, as the relatives exchanged glances, the lawyer clearing his throat. The offer was withdrawn, the smiles turned sharp, and Carmen gathered her daughters, standing on legs that felt too thin, too fragile, but somehow carried her out of that office and into the cold air outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of purple and red, and for a moment, Carmen felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, the uncertainty of what she had just done clawing at the edges of her resolve. The twins held her hands tightly as they walked to the bus stop, their small fingers warm and grounding. Carmen looked down at them at the trust in their eyes and forced a smile, telling them that they would go see the gas station tomorrow, that they would see what Grandpa had left for them. Inside, fear and doubt roiled like a storm, but there was also a spark, small and fragile but real, a spark that told her she had done the right thing. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep, their bodies curled together for warmth in the small bed they shared, Carmen sat by the window, looking out over the street lights that flickered on and off, the hum of the city like a restless whisper. She thought of her father, of his hands stained with oil, the way he had stood behind the counter at the gas station, the smell of gasoline and old coffee, the way he had looked at her when she was a little girl, his eyes tired but soft. She wondered why he had left her the gas station, why he had left her what everyone else saw as nothing, as a burden, as a joke. She wondered if it was punishment or a gift, if it was his way of giving her something real, something that was hers alone. She wondered if she was strong enough to find out. The rain began to fall softly against the window, the sound like a lullaby, and Carmen closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day pull her under. Tomorrow, she would take the girls to see the gas station. Tomorrow, she would step into the remnants of her father's life and see if she could find a way to build something out of the ashes and the laughter, out of the cracked concrete and the rusted pumps, out of the pieces of a man she had loved and hated and missed every day. Tomorrow, she would begin. The next morning came with a cold wind sweeping through the cracked windows of their apartment, rattling the glass like restless fingers as Carmen woke before dawn. She lay still for a moment, listening to the breathing of her daughters curled against her, Amara's hand thrown across her sister's chest, Lila's hair a dark cloud across the pillow they shared. For a moment, she almost let the exhaustion pull her back down, the heaviness of everything pressing into her bones, the worry of unpaid bills and the weight of yesterday's decision whispering that she was foolish, that she was reckless, that she was making a mistake that would drown them all. But the memory of Amara's small, clear voice in that cold lawyer's office cut through the fog, reminding her why she had said no, why she had chosen to keep what her father had left. She rose quietly, feet finding the cold floor, moving through the motions of the morning as the sky outside shifted from black to the deep purple of coming light. She made oatmeal with the last of the milk, spooning it into bowls as the girls stirred awake, their hair sticking out in wild directions, their eyes blinking against the morning. They ate in silence, the clink of spoons against the chipped bowls filling the room, and when they finished, Carmen dressed them in their jackets and hats, pulling on her own worn coat, the fabric thinning at the elbows, the zipper that stuck halfway up. She packed a small bag of snacks for them, slipping in the last 2 apples from the fridge, and they left the apartment, locking the door behind them with a soft click that felt final in the quiet hallway. The bus ride to the edge of town was long, the seats cold beneath them as they pressed against each other for warmth. Lila pressed her face to the window, watching as the city gave way to the outskirts, the buildings growing smaller, the roads cracked and lined with weeds. Amara leaned against Carmen, her eyes drifting closed, the early hour heavy in her small body. Carmen held them both, staring out at the gray morning, the clouds hanging low, as if waiting. When they stepped off the bus, the cold wind hit them again, sharper out here with nothing to block it, and the air smelled of damp earth and the sharp bite of fuel from the distant roads. They walked the short distance along the cracked sidewalk, past empty lots littered with broken glass and old tires, until they reached the gas station. It stood there, alone at the corner of a forgotten intersection, the sign above the pumps swinging slightly in the breeze, its paint faded to a sickly yellow, the letters chipped and nearly unreadable. One of the pumps was missing its hose, the metal rusted through, and the windows of the small store were clouded with grime and dust, streaked with the marks of old rain and wind. The building looked tired, sagging slightly as if it, too, had given up waiting for someone to care. The girls stood close to her, their eyes wide as they took in the sight, Lila's hand slipping into Carmen's, small and cold. Carmen felt a wave of despair crest over her, so strong that for a moment she nearly turned them around, ready to walk back to the bus stop, ready to forget this place and take the $5,000 to let it be someone else's problem. But then she saw the small details she had forgotten, the cracked tiles in front of the door where she had played with toy cars as a child, the outline of a faded sticker on the window that had once been a cartoon character her father had given her to place there. She saw the faint, familiar shape of the chair behind the counter where her father had sat, drinking coffee from a cracked mug, humming to himself as he counted the coins from the register. She saw these ghosts of herself and of him layered over the decay, and something inside her steadied, the grief and fear shifting into something else, something close to resolve. She found the key in her pocket, the old brass key the lawyer had given her with a small envelope of papers, the weight of it heavy and real in her hand. She stepped forward, the girls following closely, and fit the key into the lock, turning it until it clicked, the sound loud in the quiet morning. The door stuck for a moment, swollen in its frame, but then it opened with a groan, the scent of old air and dust rushing out to meet them. Inside, the store was dark, the only light coming from the dirty windows, casting long gray shadows across the dusty floor. Shelves lined the walls, some of them empty, others still holding cans of oil, bottles of faded soda, bags of chips that had expired years ago. The counter stood just as she remembered, the register still there, though the screen was dark and the keys covered in a film of dust. Behind it, the corkboard was pinned with faded notes and receipts, a calendar that was years out of date, stuck on a month when things had still been normal, when her father had still been alive. The twins moved slowly, looking around with wide eyes, their small footsteps stirring up motes of dust that danced in the shafts of light. Lila picked up a small toy car from the floor, turning it over in her hands, and Amara traced her finger along the edge of the counter, leaving a clean line in the dust. Carmen felt her throat tighten, the memories pressing against her from every corner, the weight of her father's life filling the room. She moved behind the counter, touching the register, the chair, feeling the ghosts of her father's presence. She found the small wooden box he had kept beneath the counter, the lock still intact. She knelt, finding the small key on the ring the lawyer had given her, and opened it, the hinges creaking as it lifted. Inside were papers, yellowed and brittle, receipts and notes, small slips of paper with numbers scrawled in her father's familiar handwriting, the letters sharp and dark. Beneath them was a stack of old photographs, black and white, some in color, showing the gas station in better days, the pumps shiny and new, her father standing proudly in front of them with a young Carmen on his shoulders, her smile wide and innocent. She pulled the photos out, holding them carefully, the edges crumbling slightly, and sat down on the floor, the cold seeping through her jeans as she looked at them. The twins came to sit beside her, leaning against her shoulders, looking at the photos, asking quiet questions. Carmen answered them softly, her voice steady, telling them about the day the photo was taken, about how her father had lifted her high so she could see the world from above, about how he had smiled that day, a smile she had not seen often in the years that came after. She found a folder at the bottom of the box, thicker than the others, with the word property written on the front in her father's handwriting. She opened it carefully, the paper brittle under her fingers, and found deeds and documents, maps and letters, all relating to the land the gas station stood on. As she read, her eyes widening, she realized that the land was more than just a crumbling lot at the edge of town. The city had plans to expand the road nearby, to build a new access point that would make this intersection a vital part of the new transit route. Her heart beat faster as she read, the words blurring for a moment before coming back into focus. She understood now why her father had kept this place, why he had held on to it even when it made no sense, even when everyone told him to sell. He had seen something, or perhaps he had simply believed that one day it would matter again, that it would be worth something, that it would be a legacy worth leaving behind. She closed the folder, holding it against her chest, the weight of it grounding her, the fear shifting into determination. She looked around the small, dusty store, the cracked tiles and the rusted shelves, the memories of her father layered over everything, and she saw not a burden, but a chance. a chance to build something, to give her daughters something real, to honor the man who had worked his entire life to keep this place alive. The day passed slowly as they cleaned, the girls wiping down shelves with old rags, sweeping the dust into piles that they dumped outside. Carmen worked in silence, clearing out the expired products, stacking the old boxes, opening the windows to let the cold, clean air sweep through the space. They found small treasures as they worked: a toy car, an old keychain, a photograph of Carmen with her father, their faces younger, smiling. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, they stood outside, looking at the building, the windows now clean enough to see through, the floor cleared of debris, the shelves empty but ready. The wind was cold, but it felt fresh against her skin, and Carmen looked down at her daughters, their faces smudged with dust, their eyes bright. She knew it would not be easy. She knew there would be days when she would question this decision, when the fear would return, whispering that she was foolish, that she was risking everything for a memory. But standing there, with the cold wind in her hair and the warmth of her daughters at her sides, she felt a quiet strength settle within her. Tomorrow she would find out what it would take to bring the pumps back to life, to order new stock, to clean the small office in the back. Tomorrow she would begin the long process of turning this place from a relic of the past into a promise for the future. She would learn what she needed to learn. She would work as hard as she needed to work, and she would build something here, something that would carry her father's memory forward, something that would give her daughters a home, a legacy, a place where they could belong. She locked the door behind them, slipping the brass key into her pocket, and they began the walk back to the bus stop, the last light of the day guiding their steps. Carmen held their hands tightly, her grip firm, her steps steady, the fear still there but quiet, overshadowed by the resolve that had taken root in her heart. This was her father's gift, his final message to her, and she would not waste it. She would honor him. She would fight for this place, and she would build a future from the cracked concrete and the rusted pumps, from the memories and the dreams, from the ashes and the laughter that had once filled these walls. Tomorrow they would return, and tomorrow they would begin. The next morning, Carmen rose before dawn, the cold air of the small apartment tightening across her skin as she moved quietly so as not to wake the girls. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a cup of coffee, black and bitter, the way her father had always made it, the steam rising into the dim light of the kitchen. She wrapped her coat around herself, taking a moment to press her forehead against the cool glass of the window, looking out at the still dark street below where the city seemed to hold its breath before waking. Her mind was alive with the images of the gas station, the papers she had found, the small hope that had flared within her as she read her father's handwriting, that thin thread of possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was something there worth saving. Amara and Lila woke soon after, their sleepy eyes brightening when Carmen told them they were going back to the gas station. They ate a quick breakfast of toast and jam, their chatter filling the small space with warmth, their laughter a reminder of what Carmen was fighting for, of why she could not simply walk away from what her father had left behind. She packed a bag with snacks, water, and a notebook she had found tucked away in a drawer, one that she would use to start planning the long road ahead. They took the bus again, the twins pressing their faces to the cold windows, watching as the city slid past, the gray buildings giving way to the worn streets of the outskirts where the gas station waited, silent and patient under the pale morning sky. Carmen felt a nervous energy settle into her bones, a mix of fear and determination, the weight of responsibility heavy but not crushing. She had spent the night thinking, lying awake as the city hummed outside, running through plans in her mind, calculating how much it might cost to repair the pumps, to clean the tanks, to bring life back to the small store. She knew it would take everything she had and more, but she also knew she could not turn back now. When they arrived, the air was crisp and the sky clear, the weak sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Carmen unlocked the door, the brass key cold in her hand, and they stepped inside, the smell of dust and oil meeting them like a memory. The girls immediately moved to their tasks, remembering the roles they had created the day before. Amara sweeping the floor with a small broom while Lila wiped down the shelves, their small faces set with determination, their laughter ringing out as they discovered small treasures hidden under piles of debris. Carmen let them work, their presence a comfort as she moved behind the counter, setting down her notebook, taking a deep breath as she prepared to begin the long process of figuring out how to bring the station back to life. She started with the pumps, moving outside to inspect them closely, running her hands over the rusted metal, taking notes on what parts were missing, what would need to be replaced. She checked the hoses, the nozzles, the cracked glass of the meters, her father's voice echoing in her memory as she recalled the lessons he had once tried to teach her about how the pumps worked, how to bleed the air from the lines, how to listen for the hum of the motor that meant it was working properly. She felt tears sting her eyes for a moment, the grief sharp and sudden, but she swallowed it down, focusing on the work, on the feel of the metal under her hands, the way the morning light caught the edges of the pumps, making them seem less broken, less forgotten. Inside, she made a list of what would need to be done. Cleaning out the old stock, painting the walls, replacing the broken lights, finding a supplier for snacks and drinks, calling the city to check on the status of the underground tanks. She knew it would take money she did not have, and the thought made her stomach clench, fear creeping in at the edges of her resolve. But then she looked at her daughters, at the way they moved through the store with bright eyes, finding small joys in the work, and she felt that fear harden into something else, something like resolve. They spent the day working, cleaning, sorting through the old papers and receipts, finding records of sales from years past, small notes from her father reminding himself to order more coffee, to fix the leak in the roof, to check the fuel filters. Carmen read these notes carefully, feeling a strange connection to the man she had spent so many years trying to understand, the man who had worked tirelessly in this place, who had held on to it even when everyone else told him to let it go. She felt his presence in the creak of the floorboards, in the smell of oil and dust, in the small details he had left behind, and it made her feel less alone. By the afternoon, they had managed to clear out most of the trash, the shelves wiped clean, the floor swept, the air inside less heavy with dust. Carmen stood at the door, looking out at the pumps, the cracked concrete, the empty lot across the street where weeds grew tall, and she saw it for what it could be, not just what it was. She saw a place where people could stop, where they could find warmth and kindness, where her daughters could learn the value of hard work, where she could build something real, something lasting, something that would honor the memory of her father and give them a future. They took a break, sitting on the floor with their snacks, the girls leaning against her, their laughter echoing in the small space as they shared stories and dreams. Amara talked about painting the walls in bright colors, about having a small shelf of books for travelers to read, about selling homemade cookies to people who stopped for gas. Lila wanted a small garden by the side of the building with flowers and maybe even a tree, a place where people could sit while their tanks filled, where the air would smell sweet instead of like fuel and dust. Carmen listened, letting their dreams fill her with warmth, letting their hope chase away the fear, if only for a little while. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they locked up, standing outside for a moment to look at the building, the windows now clean, the shelves ready for stock, the pumps waiting for repair. Carmen felt the cold air on her face, the weight of the key in her pocket, the small, steady beat of hope in her chest. She knew the road ahead would be hard, that there would be setbacks and failures, that there would be days when it would feel impossible. But she also knew she was not alone, that she had her daughters, that she had the memory of her father, that she had this place, this small, forgotten piece of land that could be something more. They walked back to the bus stop, the twins tired but smiling, their hands warm in hers, the city lights beginning to glow in the distance as the sky darkened. Carmen felt the exhaustion in her bones, the ache in her back, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from working towards something, from building instead of breaking, from choosing hope over fear. She knew there would be challenges, that the money would be hard to find, that the repairs would take time, that the doubts would come in the dark of the night. But she also knew she was ready to fight, ready to work, ready to build something that mattered. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Carmen sat at the small table in their kitchen, the light above her flickering slightly, the sound of the city outside a distant hum. She opened her notebook, flipping through the pages of notes she had taken, the lists of repairs, the phone numbers of suppliers, the estimates she had written down in careful handwriting. She added up the numbers, biting her lip as the total grew higher, fear rising again as she saw how much it would cost to bring the station back to life. But she did not let the fear stop her. She flipped to a new page, writing at the top in bold letters, Plan. She listed everything she would need to do, step by step, breaking down the overwhelming into the manageable, turning fear into action, into something she could hold in her hands, something she could fight with. She would call the city in the morning to check on the tanks. She would look into small business grants. She would talk to her boss about taking a few mornings off to work at the station. She would find a way to buy the paint, to fix the pumps, to stock the shelves. She would find a way because she had to, because this was their chance, because this was her father's gift, and she would not waste it. As she closed the notebook, she felt the exhaustion pull at her, the weight of the day settling into her bones, but beneath it there was a warmth, a small flame of hope that refused to go out. She looked at the photos of her daughters taped to the fridge, at their bright smiles, at the drawings they had made of the gas station with flowers and bright colors, and she let that hope settle into her, let it push back the fear, let it remind her of why she was doing this. Tomorrow she would take the next step, and the day after that another. She would keep going, one step at a time, building something from the dust and the rust, from the laughter of her daughters and the memory of her father. She would not give up, no matter how hard it became, no matter how high the cost, because this was their future, and she would fight for it with everything she had. As she turned off the light and slipped into bed beside her daughters, feeling their warmth as they shifted in their sleep, Carmen let her eyes close, the image of the gas station clean and bright in her mind, a promise of what could be, a promise she would keep. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the work, the challenges, the hope, the sparks of something new, something real, something worth fighting for. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains, brushing against Carmen's tired face as she opened her eyes to the soft, even breathing of her daughters beside her. For a moment, she allowed herself to lie still, letting the quiet settle around her like a fragile shield before the weight of responsibility returned. She turned her head and saw Amara curled up like a small cat, her thumb resting near her mouth, even though she was too old to suck it now, while Lila sprawled across the narrow bed with one arm dangling over the side, her hair a dark tangle against the pillow. They were growing fast, outgrowing their clothes and their shoes, their dreams pressing up against the small, crowded walls of their apartment. And Carmen felt the familiar ache of wanting to give them more, to be more, to prove that all the struggles and sacrifices were building something worth the hardship. She rose quietly, stepping over the squeaking floorboards, pulling on her worn jeans and sweater before moving into the kitchen to start the day. The kettle clicked and hummed as it boiled, steam curling toward the ceiling, and she poured herself a cup of instant coffee, the bitterness grounding her as she took a sip and turned to look out of the small window over the sink. She could see the city slowly waking up, cars rumbling down the street, the dull glow of store signs flickering to life, the distant hum of people rising to face their own battles. They ate breakfast quickly, the girls still talking about the gas station, about the colors they wanted to paint the walls and the kinds of snacks they would sell, their excitement turning the air in the room into something warm and bright despite the chill of the early morning. Carmen packed their lunches for school, pressing a kiss to each of their foreheads before sending them out the door, their small hands waving as they disappeared down the hallway toward the stairs, their laughter echoing back to her as she closed the door gently. She leaned against it for a moment, pressing her palms flat against the wood, breathing in the quiet before pushing herself away to gather her bag, slipping her notebook and the folder of documents into it before heading out. The bus ride to the gas station was quiet, the seats cold under her, the morning air sharp against the window she leaned her head against, her breath leaving small clouds of condensation as she watched the streets pass by. She clutched the brass key in her pocket, rolling it between her fingers as she went over her plan for the day, the list she had made the night before etched clearly in her mind. The gas station was waiting for her, standing quietly in the gray morning, the cracked concrete and rusted pumps unchanged, but somehow less intimidating now that she had spent days breathing life back into the dusty space inside. She unlocked the door, stepping into the cold air that still smelled faintly of oil and age, and flicked on the light, the weak bulb flickering before settling into a steady glow. She pulled her coat tighter around her, moving to the back room where she had set up a small corner as her workspace, the table cluttered with papers, a small lamp, and a cup of cold coffee from the day before. She began by calling the city, her voice steady as she spoke with the clerk about the status of the underground tanks, the paperwork needed to reopen them, and the inspections that would be required. Each answer came with a new hurdle, a new fee, a new piece of bureaucracy that made her stomach tighten. But she wrote everything down carefully, asking questions, making sure she understood each step before she moved on. When she hung up, she let herself take a moment to breathe, closing her eyes and resting her forehead against her hand, letting the weight of it all press down before she stood and moved to the next task. She spent the morning cleaning the small office, sorting through the papers her father had left behind, finding old invoices, receipts, and notes written in his sharp, slanted handwriting. She found lists of supplies he had ordered, small notes about customers, reminders to himself to check the filters, to call suppliers, to replace a broken light. Each piece of paper was a small window into his life, into the years he had spent here working to keep the place alive, and she felt a connection to him she had never felt before, a quiet respect for the man she had struggled to understand. The afternoon brought a visit from the inspector, a man with tired eyes and a clipboard who walked around the property with Carmen following closely, her notebook in hand as she wrote down every comment he made, every requirement he listed. The pumps would need to be cleaned and repaired, the tanks tested for leaks, the electrical systems inspected, the fire extinguishers replaced. It was a long list, each item another weight pressing down on her shoulders, but she nodded, asking questions, refusing to let herself be overwhelmed. After he left, she sat on the floor of the store, the sun slanting through the clean windows, and went over her notes, calculating costs, prioritizing what needed to be done first. She knew it would take money she didn't have, that she would have to find a way to pay for each repair, each inspection, each fee. But she also knew she had no choice but to find a way. The thought of giving up, of selling the station for a fraction of what it could be worth, crossed her mind, a tempting whisper that promised relief, but she pushed it away, focusing instead on the vision she and her daughters had shared, the image of a place that was warm and welcoming, a place that belonged to them. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she locked up the station and made her way to the bus stop, the cold evening air biting at her cheeks as she pulled her coat tighter around herself. She thought about the girls, about the stories they would want to tell her about their day, about the small moments of their lives that she wanted to be there for, to witness, to hold close. She thought about the future, about the steps she would need to take to bring the station back to life, about the sacrifices she would have to make, the hours she would have to work, the risks she would have to take. When she arrived home, the girls were waiting for her, their faces lighting up as she walked through the door, their arms wrapping around her waist as they pulled her into the warmth of the apartment. They sat together at the table, eating the simple dinner she had prepared the night before, their voices filling the space with laughter and stories, their excitement about the gas station a bright light that pushed back the shadows of doubt that tried to creep in. Amara told her about a drawing she had made of the station with flowers and bright colors, while Lila talked about the small garden she wanted to plant by the side of the building, their dreams weaving together with Carmen's hopes in a tapestry that felt strong and unbreakable. After they were asleep, their breathing soft and even, Carmen sat at the table with her notebook, going over her notes from the day, refining her plan, breaking down the tasks into steps she could take, into calls she could make, into goals she could reach. She made a list of potential suppliers, of contractors who might be willing to work with her on a payment plan, of small business grants she could apply for, of community programs that might offer support. She let herself imagine what the station would look like once it was open, once the pumps were working, once the shelves were stocked and the coffee was brewing, once the small space was filled with the laughter of her daughters and the warmth of customers who felt welcome there. She knew it would not happen overnight, that there would be setbacks and challenges, that there would be days when she would feel like she was drowning in the weight of it all, but she also knew she could not stop. This was her chance to build something real, to create a future for her daughters that was filled with stability and hope, to honor the memory of her father by breathing life back into the place he had worked so hard to keep alive. She would not give up, no matter how hard it became, because she had already made the choice, and she would see it through. In the quiet of the night, Carmen closed her notebook and looked around the small apartment, at the drawings on the fridge, at the shoes lined up by the door, at the small signs of the life she had built with her daughters. She let herself feel the fear for a moment, the uncertainty, the exhaustion. And then she let it go, focusing instead on the small flame of hope that burned within her, steady and bright. Tomorrow would come, and with it the work, the calls, the challenges. But tomorrow would also bring the chance to take another step forward, to move closer to the future she was building, to the life she was creating for her daughters, to the promise she had made to herself and to them. She would wake up, she would face the day, and she would keep going, one step at a time until the gas station was more than just a memory, until it was alive again. A place of warmth and hope, a place that belonged to them. As she turned off the light and slipped into bed beside her daughters, Carmen let her eyes close, the image of the gas station clean and bright in her mind, a promise she would keep, a promise that would carry them all into the future they deserved. The cold of early morning had become familiar to Carmen, a quiet companion as she woke each day to the faint sounds of the city beginning its slow, tired dance outside the thin windows of their apartment. This morning was no different, except that a heaviness pressed into her chest as she dressed quietly, her daughters still asleep, their hair fanned across their pillows, faces peaceful in the warmth they shared. Carmen allowed herself to linger for a moment, brushing a strand of hair from Amara's forehead, tucking the blanket around Lila's shoulder, letting the softness of the moment steady her before the weight of what she had to face returned. Downstairs, the bus ride to the gas station felt longer than usual. She watched the frost melt from the edges of the windows as the sun broke through the heavy gray clouds, her mind turning over lists and calculations, imagining the repairs that still needed to be made, the conversations she would have to endure with contractors who saw her uncertainty and her exhaustion before they saw her resolve. The smell of diesel and cold metal mixed with the coffee she sipped from a paper cup, bitter and lukewarm, reminding her of mornings at the diner, of the endless hours, of cleaning tables and pouring refills while she saved every dollar, afraid to spend on anything that was not survival. When she arrived at the gas station, the place looked the same, yet the air felt different, charged with the restless promise of change that Carmen had been pushing into each day. The windows were clean, the inside swept and organized, but the pumps still stood silent, cold metal reminders of how far she still had to go before life could truly return to this place. She unlocked the door, stepping inside and letting the quiet envelop her as she flicked on the lights, moving to the counter where her father's old records lay, pages she had begun to sort and study, trying to understand the patterns of his days, the rhythm of his business, the hope he must have carried in the careful notes he scribbled about fuel prices and regular customers. The day unfolded with small, determined steps. Carmen made calls to suppliers, negotiating for fuel deliveries once the tanks passed inspection, speaking in a calm, practiced tone that she had learned to wear like armor, even when her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone. She met with a mechanic who examined the pumps, explaining in clipped sentences what parts would need replacing, what could be salvaged, what it would cost to bring them back to life. Carmen nodded, taking notes, asking questions, letting herself believe that each signature she placed on a form, each payment she arranged to stagger over months, was a step forward. Another piece of her father's work she was pulling back from the edge of erasure. She barely noticed the time passing, the sun moving across the sky as she worked, until the shadow of a car darkened the front window. Carmen looked up from her notes, blinking at the sudden interruption, her heartbeat quickening as she saw the vehicle parked near the pumps, a sleek silver car that did not belong in this part of town, its polished surface reflecting the cracked concrete and rust like a cruel joke. The door opened, and her Aunt Lydia stepped out, her heels clicking on the pavement, her coat wrapped tightly around her slim frame, eyes hidden behind large sunglasses despite the gray clouds overhead. For a moment, Carmen froze, the childhood fear she thought she had left behind rising unbidden in her chest. Lydia had always been the voice of cold judgment, the sharp reminder of how Carmen's mother had disappointed the family before leaving, of how Carmen herself had become another disappointment with her marriage that had ended in whispers and pity. She had not seen Lydia since the day at the lawyer's office, when the laughter over the will had wrapped around Carmen like chains, when the offer of $5,000 had been made with a smile that said she was not worth more. Lydia entered the store, removing her sunglasses and looking around with a sharp, assessing gaze that took in every corner, every stain on the floor that Carmen had not yet managed to scrub away. "It's just as sad as I remembered," she said finally, her voice calm, controlled, the words cutting through the quiet like glass. Carmen felt her jaw tighten, but she said nothing, letting Lydia's words hang in the air as she set down her pen and closed her notebook. "You could have taken the money," Lydia continued, walking slowly toward the counter, her eyes scanning the shelves that were still empty, the pump repair estimates pinned neatly on the corkboard. "You could have saved yourself all this trouble, Carmen. You have 2 children, you live in a cramped apartment, and you're wasting your time and your money on a dying piece of land." Carmen took a breath, steadying herself as she met Lydia's gaze. "This place is not dying," she said softly, her voice quiet but clear. "It's ours now, and I'm going to make it work." Lydia sighed, removing a glove and placing her manicured hand on the counter. "You're being foolish. Do you think your father would want you to throw your life away on this place? Do you think he left it to you as a gift? It was a burden, Carmen, and you're too blinded by your own stubbornness to see it." Carmen felt anger rise in her, slow and steady, warming her from the inside as she thought of the hours she had spent cleaning this place, of the way her daughters had smiled as they planned the garden, of the quiet pride she had felt when she unlocked the door each morning, knowing that she was taking back something that had been almost lost. "You don't know what he wanted," she replied, her hand steady as she picked up her pen again. "You never did." Lydia's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening as she leaned closer. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into," she said, her voice low, almost a hiss. "You're not strong enough to handle this, Carmen. You've always needed someone to clean up your messes, and when you fail here, there won't be anyone left to help you." Carmen felt the words hit her, felt them dig into old wounds, but she did not let them take root. Instead, she stood, placing her notebook aside, stepping around the counter until she stood in front of Lydia, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I am strong enough," she said, her voice firm, her heart steady, "and I don't need you to believe in me." For a moment, there was silence, heavy and charged, and then Lydia stepped back, slipping her glove back on, her expression shifting into cold indifference. "I came to offer you a final chance," she said, pulling a folded paper from her coat. $75,000 for the property. Take it, and you can move somewhere better for those girls, maybe open a small shop, do something you're actually capable of managing." Carmen looked at the paper, the numbers written in clean black ink, the promise of relief, of escape, of comfort tempting her for a moment. She saw the image of a larger apartment, of shoes for the girls without holes, of nights without the weight of unpaid bills pressing into her chest. But then she saw the gas station, alive and warm, the laughter of her daughters as they helped stock the shelves, the memory of her father's hands working at the pumps, the small, quiet pride of building something real. and she shook her head. "No," she said softly, her voice clear. "We're staying." Lydia's lips tightened again, but she did not argue. She folded the paper, slipping it back into her coat, pulling her sunglasses over her eyes as she turned and walked out of the store. Carmen watched as she got into her car, the engine starting with a soft purr, the vehicle pulling away, leaving the cracked pavement and the rusted pumps behind as it disappeared down the street. The quiet returned, heavy and steady, and Carmen let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She moved back behind the counter, picking up her notebook and opening it, letting the words on the page refocus her mind. She wrote down the encounter, the offer, the refusal, letting it become part of the story of this place, part of the fight she was building, part of the resolve she was shaping for herself and for her daughters. That evening, when she returned home, the girls were waiting, their faces lighting up as she stepped through the door, their arms wrapping around her waist as they pulled her into their warmth. They ate dinner together, the girls talking about their day at school, about the stories they were writing, about the drawing Lila had made of the gas station with flowers blooming by the pumps and a bright blue sky overhead. Carmen listened, smiling, letting their hope fill her as she tucked away the fear that tried to creep back in. After they had fallen asleep, Carmen sat at the table, her notebook open in front of her, the pen steady in her hand as she continued to plan, to dream, to build. She listed the suppliers she needed to call, the grants she would apply for, the repairs she would schedule one at a time, step by step. She let herself imagine the future, the station alive and warm, the pumps working, the shelves stocked, the coffee brewing, the small garden blooming, the laughter of her daughters filling the air as they helped her greet customers. She knew there would be more visits, more offers, more attempts to shake her resolve, but she also knew she would not bend, would not give in, would not sell what was theirs for the comfort of easy relief. She would fight for this place, for the future it could give them, for the memory of her father, for the promise she had made to herself and to her daughters. As she closed her notebook and turned off the light, slipping into the warmth of the bed beside her daughters, Carmen let herself believe that they were on the right path, that the weight of family, of legacy, of hope, would not break her but would shape her into the woman she needed to become. Tomorrow would come, and she would face it, with her daughters at her side, with her father's memory in her heart, with the quiet, steady promise of a future worth fighting for. Carmen awoke before dawn to the hush that filled the small apartment when the city still slept. She lay still, feeling the warmth of her daughters on either side, the steady rhythm of their breathing, the soft sighs that escaped their lips as they dreamed. For a moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes, pressing her hand to her chest to feel her own heartbeat under her palm, reminding herself that she was alive, that she was capable, that each breath was a promise to keep going no matter how heavy the world felt on her shoulders. She rose carefully, easing out from under the blanket so as not to wake them, her bare feet touching the cold floor, grounding her in the present. She moved quietly through the apartment, putting on her jeans and sweater, pulling her hair back, washing her face with cold water to clear the fog of sleep. In the kitchen, she made coffee, standing by the small window to watch as the first hints of dawn began to color, the sky in pale gray and soft lavender, the street below empty except for the occasional car gliding past, its headlights cutting through the darkness. They ate a quiet breakfast together when the girls awoke, the clinking of spoons in their bowls the only sound between them as they smiled sleepily at her, as if they knew without speaking that today was another day to build, to move forward, to refuse the easy temptation of giving up. Carmen kissed the tops of their heads before sending them off to school, their backpacks bouncing on their shoulders as they waved goodbye, their laughter carrying up the stairwell as they disappeared from sight. She made her way to the gas station, riding the bus through streets that were beginning to wake with life, people bundled in jackets against the lingering cold, steam rising from carts selling coffee and bread, the world slowly shaking off the night to face another day. Carmen held her notebook in her lap, flipping through the pages, reading over the list of calls she needed to make, the supplies she needed to order, the small tasks she needed to complete before the larger repairs could begin. Each item was a reminder of how far they still had to go, but also how far they had come since the first day she unlocked the door and stepped inside the dust and quiet of the forgotten station. When she arrived, she took a moment to stand in front of the building, breathing in the cold morning air, letting it fill her lungs before exhaling slowly, steadying herself for the work ahead. The pump still stood silent, waiting, the cracked concrete around them dotted with puddles from the rain the night before. Reflecting the pale sky above, Carmen unlocked the door, the brass key turning easily now, and stepped inside, flicking on the lights, the soft hum of electricity breaking the quiet as she set down her bag and removed her coat, rolling up her sleeves to begin the day. The first call was to the supplier, confirming the delivery of cleaning solutions and replacement parts for the pumps, negotiating payment in small installments. Her voice calm as she explained her plan, her vision for the station, her promise to pay as each phase of the work was completed. She could hear the skepticism in the supplier's voice, the hesitation, but she pressed on, her words steady, refusing to let fear creep into her tone. By the time she hung up, she had secured a delivery date for the end of the week, and she allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction, a breath of relief before moving on to the next task. She spent the morning cleaning the storage room in the back, moving boxes that had gathered dust for years, sorting through what could be salvaged and what needed to be thrown away. She found old tools, their handles worn smooth by her father's hands, a box of receipts bundled with twine, yellowed with age, a faded photograph of her father standing beside the pumps, his arm around a much younger Carmen, both of them smiling, their faces bright with the unspoken belief that the future was theirs to shape. The photograph made her pause, sinking down onto a box as she held it in her hands, tracing the edges with her thumb, remembering the warmth of his arm around her, the way he had laughed that day, the way he had lifted her up so she could see over the top of the pumps, telling her that one day she would be tall enough to see the whole world from where she stood. She closed her eyes, letting the memory wash over her before tucking the photo into her pocket, a small talisman to carry her through the hard moments of the day. In the afternoon, the mechanic arrived to begin work on the pumps, a man named Henry with kind eyes and rough hands who nodded to her as he opened the hood of the first pump, explaining in quiet, patient words what he was doing, what needed to be replaced, how long it would take to bring each pump back to life. Carmen watched, learning as he worked, asking questions, taking notes, grateful for his steady presence, for the way he explained each step without making her feel small for not knowing. The air smelled of oil and rust as they worked, the sound of tools against metal filling the quiet, the slow, patient rhythm of repair a comfort to her as the day passed. They broke for lunch, sitting on the steps outside the station, eating sandwiches she had brought from home, the cold air turning their breath into clouds as they talked about small things, about the weather, about Henry's children who had grown and moved away, about the way the city had changed over the years. Carmen listened, grateful for the normalcy of the conversation, for the reminder that life was built in small moments like these, as much as in the big, sweeping decisions that changed everything. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Henry had managed to get one of the pumps working, the soft hum of the motor like music to Carmen's ears, a promise of what was possible, of what was coming. They stood together, watching as the pump cycled through its checks, the display blinking to life, the numbers glowing bright in the gathering dusk. Carmen felt a smile spread across her face, warmth blooming in her chest as she turned to thank Henry, who nodded, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled back. After he left, promising to return the next day to continue the work, Carmen remained outside for a moment, watching as the lights of the city began to glow, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, the first pump standing tall and alive, a quiet testament to her persistence, to her refusal to give up. She touched the metal, still warm under her hand, letting herself feel the reality of it, proof that each small step was adding up to something larger, something lasting, something worth every sacrifice. She returned home, tired but lighter, her daughters waiting for her with eager smiles, pulling her inside as they peppered her with questions about the station, about the pump, about when they could come help again. They ate dinner together, their laughter filling the small space, the weight of the day melting away in the warmth of their voices, in the way they leaned against her as they talked about their dreams, their hopes, their plans for the future they could now see taking shape. After they had fallen asleep, Carmen sat at the table, her notebook open, the photograph of her father and herself propped against a cup, the pump's glow still alive in her memory as she wrote down the events of the day. The repairs completed, the costs noted, the small victories acknowledged. She allowed herself to feel the quiet pride that came with each word, each line written proof that they were building something real, something lasting, something that would carry them forward. She thought of the community she wanted to build around the station, of the small cafe she would add inside the store, of the shelves she would fill with snacks and essentials, of the garden Layla wanted to plant, of the books Amara wanted to share with travelers, of the way they would greet each customer with warmth, with kindness, with the belief that this small place could be a sanctuary in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. As she closed her notebook and prepared for bed, Carmen allowed herself to dream of the future, of the days to come when the station would be alive with the hum of working pumps, with the laughter of her daughters, with the soft music of life returning to a place that had once been left to fade. She let herself believe that they were not just repairing pumps and painting walls, but building something greater, a place where they would belong, where they would grow, where they would honor the memory of a man who had believed in the quiet strength of persistence. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more steps to take. But Carmen was ready, her heart steady, her resolve unshaken. She would rise with the dawn. She would return to the station, and she would keep building, one piece at a time, until the place was filled with light and warmth, until the walls themselves seemed to hum with the life they had breathed back into them, until the promise of a better future was not just a dream, but a reality they lived each day. The morning Carmen woke to felt different, not because the city outside had changed, but because something within her had shifted. She could not name it, only feel it in the calmness with which she stepped into the cold morning, wrapped her coat around her, and moved with quiet determination through the narrow hallway, pausing to look at the drawings the girls had taped to the walls. There were sketches of the gas station, now with bright colors and cartoon flowers, a picture of a pump with a smiling face, and one of the three of them standing in front of the store, the sun high above them. Each line was a reminder of what they were building and why turning back was no longer an option. The twins were awake when she returned to the room, sitting up in bed, hair tangled, eyes bright with the light of a new day. They helped her prepare a quick breakfast, moving around the small kitchen with practiced ease, their laughter filling the space even as the world outside remained gray. As they ate, Lila asked if they could paint the shelves today, and Amara reminded Carmen they still needed to plant the flowers they had chosen from the market. Carmen smiled, nodding, making a mental note to find a moment in the day to let them help, to let them see that this was their work too. The ride to the gas station was quiet, the streets still waking up, shops opening, buses collecting passengers, the usual rhythm of the city that Carmen had learned to move within without letting it drown her thoughts. She pressed her hand against the pocket where she kept the small photograph of herself and her father, a reminder that every day she unlocked the station, she was stepping into something larger than herself, something that was not just about survival but about building, about carrying forward a promise made quietly in the long hours of grief and rebuilding. When she arrived, the first pump was waiting, the morning light catching on the clean glass of the meter, the gentle hum as it powered up a quiet music in the cold air. Carmen let her hand rest on it for a moment, grounding herself before unlocking the door, stepping into the warmth of the small store that had become a place of hope rather than a place of decay. The inside smelled faintly of paint now, of fresh wood and coffee grounds, the traces of life that had begun to fill the air as they prepared for the day they would open to customers again. Henry arrived not long after, his truck rumbling into the lot, bringing the parts needed to repair the remaining pumps. They worked side by side, Carmen asking questions, learning about each piece of the machinery, understanding the systems that made them work, the small details that her father must have known well, the same details she would need to know if she was to keep the station alive. There was a quiet satisfaction in the rhythm of the work, in the way each repaired part was a step forward, a small victory that would eventually become the life of the station. By midday, 2 pumps were fully operational, and Henry tested them, showing her how to reset them, how to clean the filters, how to read the error codes. Carmen took notes, her handwriting neat and steady, her questions clear, her mind collecting every piece of information, shaping her confidence into something practical. Each small hum of the machinery felt like a heartbeat of the station, a sign that the place was waking up, becoming something more than a shell of what it had once been. In the afternoon, Carmen took a break to meet with a supplier who arrived with boxes of snacks and bottled drinks for the store shelves, the first stock they would carry when the doors reopened. The supplier, a middle-aged woman named Denise, smiled as she watched Carmen and the girls, who had arrived after school, help carry boxes inside, their small hands steady as they lined up the cans of soda and the packets of chips on the newly cleaned shelves. Denise shared advice about pricing, about what customers liked, about the best times to place new orders, her kindness, another reminder that the world held people willing to help if you showed you were ready to work. As the girls finished helping, Lila pulled Carmen aside, showing her the small packets of flower seeds she had brought in her backpack, her eyes wide with excitement as she asked if they could plant them by the side of the building. Carmen felt the tiredness in her bones but nodded, letting the girls lead her outside where the patch of dirt by the building had been cleared days before. Together, they knelt on the cold ground, the girls' laughter rising as they argued about where to place each seed, their small fingers pressing the earth gently, the dirt under their nails a promise that life would grow here too, alongside the hum of the pumps and the light in the store. They finished as the sun was beginning to set. The sky above painted in streaks of orange and purple, the city's lights flickering on one by one. Carmen stood, brushing dirt from her hands, looking at the small patch of ground they had transformed, the seeds hidden beneath the soil, waiting for rain, for warmth, for time to become what they were meant to be. It felt fitting, this quiet act of planting, as they worked to bring life back to a place that had once felt forgotten, as they claimed it as theirs, not just for survival, but for living, for growing, for becoming. They closed up the store as the first stars appeared, the girls chattering about the flowers, about the customers they would greet, about the garden they wanted to build with benches and bright colors. Carmen listened, letting their voices fill the space, letting their dreams settle into the corners of the building, into the walls that now smelled of paint and hope, into the hum of the pumps that would soon serve customers who would become familiar faces, neighbors, friends. That night, back in their small apartment, they cooked a simple dinner together, the girls insisting on helping, their laughter and teasing softening the weariness that had begun to settle into Carmen's shoulders. They ate at the small table, the warmth of the meal and the closeness of the moment a reminder that they were already living the future they were building, piece by piece, day by day. After the girls had fallen asleep, Carmen sat by the window, the city lights outside blinking like distant stars, the soft sounds of traffic below a quiet reminder of the world still moving. She opened her notebook, writing down the events of the day, each repaired pump, each shelf stocked, each seed planted, each small victory a promise to herself that they were on the right path. She thought about her father, about the years he had spent working quietly, maintaining the station with steady hands, believing in its purpose even when it brought more struggle than comfort. She thought about how he had chosen to leave it to her, not as a burden, but as a chance, a legacy that was meant to grow in her hands, to become something new while honoring the past. She let herself feel the grief of missing him, but also the gratitude for the lessons he had given her, for the strength he had left behind in her blood, in her bones, and the resolve she carried each day. As she closed the notebook and prepared for bed, Carmen allowed herself to believe fully, without hesitation, that the future they were building was possible, that the station would open, that customers would come, that the shelves would empty and be filled again, that the pumps would serve travelers and neighbors, that the small garden would bloom, that the laughter of her daughters would continue to echo within the walls they had painted and repaired together. She would wake in the morning ready to face the work, ready to continue, ready to open the doors wide when the time came, knowing that this was not just about survival, but about building a life worth living, about creating a place where they belonged, where they were safe, where they could dream and grow. It was about honoring a legacy not with silence, but with action, with purpose, with the quiet, persistent work of creating something good in a world that often felt indifferent. Tomorrow would come, and Carmen would rise with it, stepping into the dawn with steady hands, her daughters by her side, her father's memory guiding her. The small hum of the pumps waiting to greet the first customer who would step through the doors, the flowers waiting beneath the soil to bloom in the light of the sun, the legacy alive, not in stone, but in every breath, in every small kindness, in every seed of hope planted and nurtured until it became something beautiful. If you found this story meaningful, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Check out the other videos on the channel for more stories that will keep you thinking. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them today